the morning of the attack and heard a hippo making its way upstream. So I look behind to see what it is, and it's her. She's bitten into the back of the raft.
What was the most surprising thing about Oman that you weren't expecting?
Cheesecake. Really good cheesecake.
Hello, I think these are my people. I can't believe I snorted on cheesecake. Today's guest is an award-winning adventurer and accomplished sportswoman who paddled the Nile from its source to the Mediterranean. She survived hippo attacks, being arrested and detained, as well as lethal rapids. She travelled through a country on the brink of civil war and in the background was dealing with the risk of kidnap. If that wasn't enough, she decided to paddle the 2,500 kilometres down the Murray River. She cycled across Australia and earlier this year headed to the Middle East, where she biked solo 1,600 kilometres through Oman. Episode 118, Sarah Davis. The One Moment Please podcast.
Yeah.
I got you on the podcast because I had a chat with Michelle a little while ago.
Yeah.
And she said, you need to chat. Well, actually, she's like, oh, I know this beautiful lady called Sarah and she's, paddled the Nile. And I was like, why do I not have her details and why has she not been on the podcast already? So here you are. You're on the podcast and I'm super excited about that.
I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. So how the hell did getting you to the point where you were paddling down the full length of the Nile? Because you started in the Mediterranean, didn't you?
Other way around. So it's actually one of the few rivers that sort of go from south to north, sort of go up the planet as opposed to down, you could say.
Oh, I think I heard that somewhere and then completely forgot that fact. How does it, it's not flowing upstream. It can't flow up.
No. It's still that. It's, you've got the highest point is at the source and then it just, gradually flows down. But there isn't a huge difference actually from a height perspective. It's probably is not the right terms at all.
Elevation.
So it's just, that's the one. Thank you very much. So it doesn't, you've got the sections of rapids, yes, but it's not the fastest flowing of rivers overall because there isn't that massive elevation change. At least that's what I was told.
Now, when I spoke to Michelle, she decided to go across the Atlantic Ocean and never had rowed before in her life. And she went, I'm going to do this solo. You did the Nile solo, but had you rowed or paddled or done anything on the water before?
Yeah, so I got into paddling. So I joined the Surf Club, North Bondi Surf Club, when I moved from Melbourne to Sydney. And through that then got into, I used to love long distance running, but injuries and arthritis and things like that put an end to that. And that's when I got into paddling. So I used to do surf ski, I still do surf ski paddling, and then got into the long distance ocean paddling. And when I came up with the idea of I want to go on a big expedition, I wanted it to be paddling based in some format. So this ended up being a mix of rafting, which I hadn't done. So, I'd just done, commercial trips where you go on holiday and it's like, oh, let's have a go at whitewater rafting. That's all I'd done on that, but had done the kayaking.
So how does one start the logistics process of figuring out how you're actually going to navigate the Nile? Because it is a dangerous river. I mean, there's a lot of hippos, there's a lot of crocodiles. I have seen that video footage of the guys that were kayaking down the Nile and a crocodile just pulls one out of the kayak and takes him.
Oh, the Congo.
Never seen again.
Yeah, it was on the Congo.
That was on the Congo, wasn't it?
No, it was on the Congo.
Oh.
But you've got some of those crocs in some sections of the Nile for sure. It was just a lot of research to begin with. It's like, okay, someone else will have done something similar or will have done this, and found a book actually of that guy that was taken, Hendry. It was a book about his expedition down the Nile from Uganda to the Mediterranean. That was my first bit of research. Then I read Leveson
Hang on a minute. Your first bit of research was about a guy who got taken by a crocodile, pulled out of his kayak, and you went, "This is a good idea. I'm gonna do this."
Yeah, when you put it like that, but it's like, well, that was the Congo, it was fine.
You and I have very different mindsets, Sarah. I
I would read that book and go, oh, that's not really something that I'd ever want to do. And
It was a happy ending on his Nile expedition.
On the crocodile side?
That ended fine. It was unfortunate. It was an expedition he did after he'd done the Nile, when he joined the two American guys and they went down the Congo, and he was tragically taken on that one.
Okay. So the book that you read wasn't about
it wasn't about that situation, but I knew when I came to read it, because I'd done the research and I knew what had tragically happened to Hendry, and so I read that book, and then I read Leveson Wood's book. So he walked the length of the Nile, and there was a chap mentioned in both books, Pete Meredith. So he was on Hendry. Him and Hendry basically organised the expedition together down the Nile, and Pete had advised Leveson, and so I reached out to Pete and said, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I'd really value a chat. And it was then that conversation he gave me sort of the absolute bare bones of sort of line items on a project plan of like, okay, government approvals and when to go and what craft to use and the kind of team to have. So I just had this vague idea of like, okay, these are all the kind of headline items that I then need to expand out on and turn into a really detailed project plan. Like one of the things I did through work, it's sort of been professional risk management and project management. So I really got to use those for a passion project, which was really nice. I never expected to use risk management. I always thought it was a bit dry and dull and boring, and you're always seen as the fun police. And suddenly this really brought it to life, because I was like, oh wow, this is really useful. So that was the start of the sort of the initial research, and then it was reaching out to people and having conversations and doing a ton of research. And I loved it, because I just learned so much as I went along. I mean, there was a hell of a lot to do, and there were times as like, am I ever going to get this off the ground? But got to learn a lot and speak to people I would never have otherwise spoken to.
So I just want to sort of break this down a little bit, because, and I'm not advocating anyone doing this, by the way, but in terms of your process, very different to a couple of guys doing it from a security point of view as well, compared to being a lone woman and doing this solo. And I'm not wanting to say that women can't do anything solo, but there is you were going through some pretty dangerous countries in terms of on the brink of civil war and so forth that the Nile runs through. So there are security risks in it. So if you're doing this by yourself, what's the practicality of a team supporting you? Are you going from, okay, I'm leaving at point A and I'll meet you at point B, and if I don't turn up at point B, then raise the alarm? Like, what's the reality of it?
There were multiple sort of different ways that I approached it. So one, I was never there was only one small part that I was actually on my own. Basically, I wanted to have local people with me for multiple reasons, language, cultural, company, and to make up for where I particularly say in rafting, where I don't have the expertise and the skills, but I needed to kind of plug that hole, because I wasn't willing to invest the time to develop those skills to get to the point that I could deal with massive rapids and things like that.
Local knowledge of the river.
Local knowledge, and people, able to help with getting approvals if they were needed. And that was a big thing in Sudan. The local canoe and rowing federation there was so helpful. And I did a recce beforehand to Sudan and Egypt to just get a gauge of the kind of support I'd have and start to build some networks. And I met, officials from the British and Australian embassies. I'm a dual passport holder, and then met local paddlers, so that I kind of had those networks and started to build people to speak to there to then come and join me on the trip. And for the initial part through Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda, where we had the rapids, then I'd gone to Uganda and met some people there who ran the commercial rafting trips. And then it was like, okay, well, my aim is to get people through that to join. I mean, I was trying to find other people as well, but it was just very difficult to find people to join. So I ended up engaging some Ugandan rafting guides to join me on that first part. So that was sort of the with me people. And then before going, I did hostile environment awareness training, which is really all around personal security in potentially hostile environments. And when I did my risk assessment, it's like,
how do you source that? Where do you go to get that?
I Googled. I mean, I knew I wanted to do that training, and then I Googled to find an organization that offered it, and it worked out. So, there's different forms of that kind of training, and I just had a one-on-one, and we went through the potential threats I could be facing and how those could play out, and some specifics to each country, and a lot of just general keeping travel safety in a lot of ways, learning about things that I never expected to learn about, the stages of a kidnap and where you're safe in a hotel, and I know all sorts of things. I came out of this day of being drilled on effectively every worst case that could come up, and really was like, what am I doing? I must be out of my mind. And then I reminded myself, okay, we've literally just gone through all of these worst cases. This is not a prediction of what's going to happen. It's a possible things that could happen. And now I'm going to try and make sure I, follow the advice and do things that will reduce that risk, and it's things like on social media posting. So, okay, so I'm not going to be posting as I go. There's going to be a 2-week delay on everything because everyone knows where I'm going to be. The only element of surprise that I had was when I was there. And obviously I wasn't sharing my tracker with people and things, so there was some of those sort of security things I took on board. But when I'd, then looked at my risk assessment and things like the potential of being arrested or things going wrong, I don't know the standard operating procedures of how to deal with this. I can't put this on my friends and my family to work this out should it eventuate. So that's when I decided to engage the company that provided the hostile environment awareness training. And they offered a service where I would get really detailed intel reports each day, like super detailed. And I would have an operator, so it was Dave, who I checked in with every single day. He'd give me these intel reports, and he was there to deal with any crises that came up. They also had a cyber security team, so they were keeping an eye out for the people who were following me on social media and online chat rooms and dark web. So if there was anyone with a slightly dubious background talking about me, then they were sort of ready and alerted for it. So we had situations where people that, we'd really rather they didn't know about me, did. So we would just be on alert, or I would be on alert in certain situations.
I mean, obviously that is hugely helpful, and knowing that someone's sort of got your back in some regards, I think would be a great mental sound of mind. But was there also an element of, I wish I didn't know that the people that I'm not really wanting to know about me, is there kind of a peace of mind being ignorant to the fact that these nefarious individuals are potentially talking about you?
I mean, it could have been ignorance is best, but I'd rather be forewarned and forearmed kind of with some of these things, and to know. I don't know. There could well be some situations where Dave hadn't told me the whole. I wouldn't be surprised if he did put a filter on it potentially sometimes. I don't know. But I think, he had to be honest with me, so I knew what was happening and what was going on.
Were these local gangs that were potentially would kidnap you and ransom you? Is that sort of where we're talking?
I mean, that was the risk. And it's certainly obviously not just through these countries. And the advice I got is most of the kidnappings tend to be sort of local on local, and it's a lot more pervasive than we realise.
I'm more talking about the intel that you got when they said, yes, you've got some people talking about you that you don't really want to be talking about you.
So it was people who had been involved, say, in kidnap before. My understanding was that they'd, on online chat rooms, there'd been some kind of discussion or some mention. I don't have all the details. So then it's like, okay, let's not hang around in this area. And, we've got all the delays. And then when I was sharing stuff on social media, it's like, and my team here and people here. So it's trying to make me not look like a soft target. Was one thing. Being an individual as well. I mean, people who tend to get targeted, I think more from companies or NGOs, because they know that there's insurance there to pay. It's a relatively high risk to go and start kidnapping someone. So you want to be sure that there's going to be
money,
some kind of payout at the end of it. But it certainly added to the experience, just having that kind of low level threat.
In terms of using local knowledge, I've interviewed a few military people and they were talking about how they had the locals embedded in their team and so forth as part of the integration of the services.
Mm.
If you're paddling with a local, were you ever concerned that they were going to tip off people?
I mean, yes, it could have been a risk. Like everyone who I had joined me, I would pass the names to Dave, and then they would run a security check to find out what they could on the people who were with me to see if there were any red flags that came up.
Okay. You start navigating the Nile. How long does the actual trip take you?
It was just under 6 months, but that wasn't on the go all the time because I would do a section and then stop because this is all self-organized and, I didn't have ridiculous amounts of money to throw at it to have people organizing everything ready for me kind of thing. So do a section which might be up to a maximum of 4 weeks, but often it would be like a couple of weeks and then, okay, right, let's stop, resupply, get the team for the next bit, right, let's go, let's execute the next bit. And then waiting, like I ended up waiting for quite a bit of time to get my visa for Sudan. There were just some issues and delays of the people also organizing it. And then it's like, well, now we're getting really close to Christmas. It's like, well, I'd rather spend Christmas in Uganda. I'd got to know people. I'd ended up spending quite a bit of time there and had friends. And it's like, well, I think I'd rather spend Christmas here. So yeah, and then when I get to Sudan, because there was so much going on, like they were trying to, the protests were happening, they were trying to overthrow the government. It was just a tricky time to try and get people's attention from an authority's perspective. They have like other priorities, right? So things like that just took a bit of time to get things going. But that was good as well, because then I got to spend time with people like the rowing and canoe club, the people I met through there. Just spent so much time with them and just ended up feeling like family with them. They were just beautiful. I got to go to someone's cousin's wedding and I got to experience a Sudanese wedding, which was because people said, you've got to go to a Sudanese wedding, and ended up getting to go to one. And it was this amazing, amazing experience, which, it's just not your normal thing. And if it had been this all organized, right, you just go straight all the way through, I would have missed out on so much.
You said that you have in your bio that you got attacked by a hippo. When did that happen?
That was on day 6.
Oh my goodness! So
that was fairly, right. I mean, it was literally the first day that we were in Hippo territory because we were coming down through Rwanda, and for some of it we'd been above a dam, so there were none above the dam, and we were just outside Kigali. And I remember waking up in the tent the morning of the attack and heard a hippo making its way upstream, so it was relatively close. And it's one of those things where you hear a noise and just every muscle just tenses. And it's like, oh, okay. Because they really were one of my big fears coming into this. And we got underway and came across a small pod of hippos and got around them. That was fine. But we were coming up. The river there was not
And you in a raft? Are you in a
white,
so we're in a white,
yeah, so in an inflatable raft. So there's me, the 3 guys, Peter, Paolo, and Koa. We've got all our gear there. They've got barrels of food all strapped on. And rather than it just be all of us with a single paddle, what they had was a platform with oars on. And they would face forward and then sort of sit or stand and row kind of like one sort of oar at a time, like doing it that way rather than sort of both oars at the same time. And then there would be 2 of us up front paddling. So that was the way that we were generally moving the raft along. But as I say, yeah, there was a lot of gear on it. And then we also had a whitewater kayak so that if we got to rapids, Koa would be the guy to go and scout the rapids to see if there was a line we could take or whether we were going to have to portage. So we were all in the raft. The river wasn't that wide at this point. I don't know, maybe 50 meters or so wide, maybe a little bit more, but quite windy with these short, steep banks. So it meant you couldn't see that far ahead. And people had advised, right, what you need to do if you're in hippo territory, every so often sat the surface of the water because they're asleep underneath, they hear the noise, they pop up to see where it is and you can go around them. But here it was just, as I said, it was quite narrow. So there wasn't a lot of wriggle room to go around them.
Why are you waking them up? Wouldn't it just be easier just to go over them and leave them asleep?
Well, not if they wake up underneath and they sort of see you going over the top and then
when they get a fright,
decide to get a little bit of a fright. Yeah. So you just want to try and stay as far away from them as possible. But we came up to this sort of left and right turn. And as we were about to sort of hit and turn left, in the corner of the opposite, in the shallows, this little baby pops up. And we stop paddling, but you've got gentle flow of the river, so it's taking us forward. And I literally just get the words out of "where's mum?" and she pops up on the right. And then we basically drift between her and her baby.
Oh, no.
We messed up. We messed
Blame
up
it on
big
the
time.
river.
Yeah. So, these are animals that seem to have been born angry, and it doesn't take much to really push them over the edge. So she came at us. We're trying to get away to the riverbank. I didn't see it because so she put her head under. It's like she was trying to flip the raft, but it's super heavy with us and all the stuff on it. And we're still trying to get away from her. And I just remember feeling this massive tug on the raft, and I look behind to see what it is, and it's her. She's bitten into the back of the raft.
The inflatable raft.
Luckily inflated in sections, so it wasn't like the whole thing just went. It was just one section went down.
I can just see you like a, sinking ship slowly going into this, in between this mama hippo and the baby hippo going, this cartoon, trying to frantically paddle with your knees in the water.
Oh my goodness, I would have swum very bloody quickly, I can tell you, if that had happened. And it was just this, I've experienced fear before, but it was just a different kind of primal fear, just feeling that adrenaline going through the body. But I just also remember having a very clear thought of, wow, there is still 2 meters of raft and koa between me and her. So it's, we're not at the worst situation yet. And luckily she let go. I don't know whether it popped or the air coming out, or she realized now she was a bit further away from her baby and didn't feel that we were as big a threat as we had been. I'm not sure. But it meant that we could get to the river's edge and jump out, and then she backed off a little bit. So then we unloaded the raft and pulled it up, and then the guys spent an hour or so patching it so that we could pump it back up and get going again. I was really excited to get back on the water at that point.
Like, with you in that situation where you're on the bank, are you concerned that they're going to come up the bank and attack you on the bank? Because they can move quite fast over land. Actually,
yeah,
really
I mean,
fast.
people, and they get out at night. They get out at night and graze. People are advised they generally don't get out during the day. So it was a possibility, but wasn't expecting it. And well, we did have some more run-ins with hippos. Like, they never got out and chased us. But we'd been advised when camping at night, if possible, put ropes around the tent. So we had throw bags, which you sort of have in white water. So it's like a rope in a bag. So then you can hold the rope, throw the bag with the rest of the rope into someone if they're in the water, but also useful to have. And we would put the throw bags and the rope around where we were camping if we could, because although they could obviously break through a bit of rope, they generally won't. I think they've got quite sensitive kind of skin, and they'd rather just out there to graze, and there's plenty of other grazing to do. So we would do that at night if we could, and then we certainly wouldn't get out of our tents at night. There were also crocs, and so once we're in for the night, you stay in the tent until the morning. And there was one night I did hear a hippo grazing really close by. Oh, I guess I'll just drift off to sleep.
It's a restful sleep that you're planning on then. It's like, what are you doing? Closing your eyes and imagining it's a cow or something beside you. It's just a cow. It's just a cow. It's just a cow.
I just put my earplugs in now and just pretend it's not there.
Jeez. Yeah, between the crocs and the hippos, lordy. So, at what point did you get arrested? Because you did get arrested on this trip.
That was 2 days later. So we'd had that.
Oh my
incident.
God! So you had the hippo attack, and then you get
yeah,
arrested.
and it was amazing. Like, Peter was so good at coming up with alternative solutions. Like, because I've been told, like, this is the way you deal with hippos, and it's like, oh, okay, and I'm very like compliant. It's like, well, why? I wouldn't know any different, so I just trust what everyone else knows. And it was Peter who said, okay, this whole stepping on the surface of the water, we can't see where they are. I think it's what we need to do. And we haven't got much space to go around them. I think what we should do is when we come across another one, we stop and we get off the river and leave the raft there and then tow it past. I was like, oh my goodness, that is a genius idea. I love that. And an hour later, we came across a big male hippo, and he put on a psychotic display, like jumping up and down, opening, closing his jaws, scattering excrement with his tail. It was terrifying to watch from the bank, let alone if we tried to get past him. And we waited for it, the psychotic display to calm down, and then we towed the raft past. And we couldn't always do that, but I know he was just this. And there was another time we were dealing with hippos, and he just came up with another brilliant solution. It was like, oh wow, it was a real lesson in coming up with different responses under pressurized situations and thinking outside of the box and going, really looking at the situation and what we were dealing with.
Mm. But 2 days after that hippo attack, you got arrested. So you're day 8 now into the trip.
Day 8, yeah. So we'd come down the Nile, and it was where it turns into the Akagera, but it was also right on the edge of a lake. So, and that was right on the border with Burundi. But because it's on the edge of a lake, it was an unmarked border. The river that we're trying to get onto had multiple channels, but they weren't all on the GPS that I had. Well, none of them were. So we were like, well, we don't want to go the wrong one. So we asked some of the fishermen who are around. So you'd have 2 in a dugout canoe, and there are a few pairs around, and 2 of them came over to help. And the guy said, look, come this way and wait here, and then I'll call some friends and they'll come and show you the way to go. I was like, okay, fine. So we do follow him, and sort of we're edging onto the lake, but there's a little grassy island. So we wait there. And then we see this tinny coming across the lake. And as it gets closer, can see a machine gun on the front of it. And the 3 guys inside are in army uniform, AK-47 slung over their shoulder. They get to us. They asked to see our papers and passports, so hand those over. I've also got papers from the Rwandan government effectively supporting what I was doing and explaining it. But what we didn't realize is this guy had actually led us across the unmarked border. So we were kind of just in Burundi. We didn't have any plans to be there, so we didn't have any visas. So the guys then say, right, we want to ask you some more questions, row across the lake. So we haven't really got much choice. And so we start rowing across the lake. When these guys aren't looking, I then put a message into Dave to tell him what's happening. And we get to the other side and they question us. They then decide they want to go through everything. So they literally going through all the food barrels, opening up boxes of matches to check what's in there. And I had a chat with the guy who is in charge and was like, look, what's the deal here? And he said, look, you'll be on your way soon. We pretty much finished. It's like, okay, great. And by this point, you sort of they had to put up a bit of a cordon because there would have been, 200 villagers watching this bizarre spectacle unfold. And then the police got involved. I didn't realize the police were there because they were all in plain clothes, which was, just in tracksuits. And they decided they wanted to make more of it. So they said, right, we want you to come for more questioning, load all your stuff up in the back of this flatbed ute. And so we did. And it also had 2 benches back to back. So then they said, right, climb up there. So there was 2 of us on each side and a armed policeman on each corner. And we start careering through the Burundian countryside. And we had one stop. And I said, look, please, can we get change? Because we're all in paddling gear. It's getting dark. It's getting cold, which was true. And they said, okay, fine. But I knew that I'd be put in a room on my own. And so I'd be able to get another message out to Dave to let him know what was happening. So did that. We carry on and we get to the police compounds. And none of it's threatening. Like, they're not being nasty or aggressive with us. And we're shown into a room and there's more questioning about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And asking about marital status and all of these sorts of things. And then eventually it's like, right, you're going to be effectively put under house arrest. So taken to a hotel, which I was going to have to pay for. We had to hand over our phones, passports, cameras, the whole lot. But I managed to keep sort of hidden on me the GPS and the sat phone. And we got outside and we were sort of given a couple of minutes to grab whatever we wanted to take with us, and everything else is put in a storeroom. So then we're waiting for transport to take us. And this guy comes over, and who turned out to be the chief prosecutor of the area. And he came up to me and he said, oh, I hear you're unmarried and you don't have children. I'm like, yeah. He said, that's shameful. I was just about ready to snap the blades. Like, oh, I'm tired. I'm cranky. I'm hungry.
I'm surprised you didn't lie or weren't advised to lie.
In that situation, I mean, it wouldn't have made any difference. There were some times where I did, yes, fib about my marital status just because it was going to be easier. But in that situation, it was like, I didn't think it was going to make much of a difference. And this guy just smiled at him and said, yes.
Shameful, Shameful.
Shameful. Couldn't believe it. So then we're taken to this hotel, and I use that term quite loosely, and armed guard outside on the road. But there was this raised veranda, so it was like first floor, and that's where my room was, and it had doors opening out onto this veranda. And so under cover of darkness, I literally sort of commando crawled out there with the sat phone, because obviously I needed clear line of sight to the satellites, and sparked up the phone and put a call in to Dave. And I was very relieved when I heard his voice, and he's like, Sarah, it's all going to be fine. Just be calm, be compliant. Work's underway to get you out. And a couple of days later, after a slightly tense exchange, we were released back into Rwanda. And a couple of days later, we were back on our way.
Okay, so let's go into that tense exchange. What actually happened?
It felt very tense. Like they also tried to get me to get in a different car to the guys, which I refused because I was concerned that if we were separated, they might treat the guys differently, worse. So I refused to get in the other car.
Worse? I would have thought they would have treated you worse.
I didn't think so. I think they were potentially more. And maybe, I mean, I could have misread that, but
I mean, you were unmarried and without child, so I thought that you would have been more at risk.
Been more risk. It didn't occur to me that I would be worried. I was more worried about them. So I refused. So they were like crammed into the back, and at one point, a call comes through on the mobile phone I haven't got my phone back at that point, I don't think. And then they hand me the phone. And I'm like, hello. And it was the British embassy, like the FCO. And they was like, how are you? So I'm fine. It's like, have you been hurt? Have they threatened you? Have you been injured? It was like, no, I'm fine. So that was sort of okay. And then we stopped at one point, and they're getting out, and there's more phone calls happening. And it's just, I don't know. It felt reluctant, very reluctant, put it that way. And then we finally, we get to the border, and we're all taken into a room sort of one by one and asked what's happening. And then I go into another room, and I walk in there, and this time I can see the Rwandan flag. And the guy across the desk just says to me, it's like, you're safe. It's okay. And yeah, felt very relieved at that point. But the guys got quite a lot of questioning on the Burundian side, and they weren't being physically aggressive, but verbally they were beginning to get a bit aggro with them, which to me sort of highlights it's like, oh yeah, I think that the guys could have been possibly at risk if we hadn't all stuck together.
Why were they being so aggressive to the locals more than you as a Westerner?
I don't know. Okay.
I wondered if it was a tension between the countries. Like,
I'm not sure what it was all about. But we were, yes, very relieved. We did cheers. We went under the sign. So we had I had a fixer in Rwanda, which we hadn't expected to have anything to fix. She had quite a lot to fix. There were other things as well. So she sent a driver, and so we, load up all our stuff, and we drive under the sign that says, "Welcome to Rwanda." And we cheered and we high-fived.
And probably had a stiff drink that night. Can you get alcohol in Rwanda?
Well, I don't drink, so that was I don't know, I think I would have treated myself to some chocolate. Sugar's my drug of choice. And yes, we went out and had some very nice food and just chilled in Kigali. So we went back to the capital, Kigali, and chilled there for a couple of days just to let things, and conversations with embassy people and bits and pieces. And and then we got back underway again, but we put in quite a long way away from the border with Burundi, not surprisingly.
So did they take your raft out of the river as well? If they asked you to take off
Oh,
everything
we had to
from the
take,
raft?
we had to, and then we used the time because we'd gone through down the river, we'd gone down, it was very muddy and stuff. So it was like, okay, we'll take our time. We'd washed it off, deflated it, packed it all down. So then we could transport it on cars and things. And so, yeah, it's like a big land people carrier so that we could put everything on the roof and inside and then get transported to the river and get going.
I'm surprised at no point, considering how thorough they were. I mean, you mentioned that they were going through even packets of matches and stuff to have a look and see in them. I'm surprised that they didn't search your person and that you could thankfully hide the sat phone and GPS on you.
Was really lucky to do that. And I did actually, when we were being searched, they did look at the sat phone when they were just going through everything, and they didn't realize it was a sat phone. And it was Koa who said, "Oh, it's just a mobile phone." And then after that point, I hit it, and there wasn't the communication to go, "Oh, I think there was another phone." Like they just didn't. Yeah, there wasn't the comms there, thankfully, and was just able to make sure I had some kind of communication device on me.
Scary stuff. So that's day 8. So 8 days in, we've had a hippo attack or 2, and then you've been arrested.
And this is where it was so valuable having Dave, because I knew he would call me on it if I was being reckless. Like there was no doubt on that side. And, as he said, like, just settle it down for a couple of days and then you can get going again. It's like, okay, great. Because otherwise I think I definitely would have started to self-doubt and question, should I be doing this? Is this, it's a bit of universal messaging coming through going, stop. But having him there that I knew would say if I was being reckless or dumb was really valuable, what another confidence giver. And then it was someone to bounce decisions off with, because, having never done anything like this, having him there as a sounding board, again, just gave me huge confidence. So I could say, okay, well, I'm thinking of doing this when we were having challenges getting across Lake Victoria. And he's like, yeah, sounds good. Okay, great. So I didn't have to second guess myself.
Yeah.
Or I could ask him for advice.
Something that I spoke a lot with Michelle when I spoke to her was following the intuition in your gut. And you're now talking about relying on somebody else and not your own self-gut, because you would have potentially started to doubt yourself. How much of that is a conscious thing in regards to I'm going to trust my gut or trust somebody else in a situation?
And I think for me, that being able to trust my gut, I'll do that when I've got some experience. But I'm starting off doing this and I don't have the experience to sort of have that knowing. So this is where I was sort of outsourcing my lack of experience and expertise. But for example, as we went on, I started to trust my knowing and we had a choice of the river split. One of the co-rowers on the oars wanted to go the short route, and I'm looking at it and assessing it going, no, there's no exit points. I don't think so. We're going to go the long way. And he did a bit of a dummy split, but it was like, no, we're going the long way. And as we then got to the point where the rivers joined, where we would have come out on the short route, there was a big pot of hippos there. So, you just but that's after we've been going for weeks. And then I was able to learn I had that knowledge, a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of expertise and experience now to start trusting my knowing and making more calls. Whereas before I was outsourcing that while I built up a little bit of experience.
How reluctant were you to hand over your passport to them when you got
Didn't have a
arrested?
choice. Didn't have a choice.
Right.
It was,
something that as you've always heard, never give up your passport, don't
yeah.
Yeah.
When you're in the
reality
police compound of
at their mercy, really. Yeah.
What are they going to do?
You were traveling through countries. I mean, you sort of touched on the rapids and having to come out of rivers at some point and port the raft and then jump back in again. But how do you, is it just a local knowledge? Like, how do you map out the Nile and go, oh, at this point, there's around this corner, there's a waterfall or there's a dangerous rapid that we're just not going to be able to navigate and to know that before you come upon it?
I mean, Paolo had done, so the rapids were mostly on the stretch through Rwanda, well, a little bit in Rwanda, but it was in Tanzania. He had done it, although he couldn't, always remember exactly where the rapids were. You'd be relying on, you'd hear them and you'd see them before you got to them. So then it would be a case of where we could, then you'd pull over, Co would go and scout it and come back and let us know what his recommendation was of a plan. So it was, if we'd had a drone, then we could have thrown a drone up and put that ahead. But getting a license to use a drone in Rwanda was going to be really difficult to do. And it just fell into the too hard basket with everything else I had to organise.
Why would you ask, and this is obviously coming from a first world situation, right? Why would you not just, you're in the middle of, I would imagine, nowhere. Why would you just not use a drone?
But they check it on the way in. So like when I came into Uganda with a drone, it got confiscated. Because I went back to Uganda afterwards and I did have a drone because I wanted to get some footage. They confiscated it and then I picked it up on the way out. Because I pick it up through the scanners.
Right. And are they just concerned it from a military risk? Like, why are they?
I don't know. I'm not sure. In some places, they are very, so say going through Uganda, they're very sensitive on any kind of big infrastructure. So you're told, don't take pictures of dams and this, that, and the other. So there may be that side of it. I'm not sure.
Okay. How are you navigating countries that are on the brink of civil war?
Look, going through Sudan, again, I was very much relying on the intel advice from Dave. And then we always had a loose plan for evacuating. So it's a kind of, if it really does go, because he said, look, the way it could go is effectively what's happened, where you had a power struggle. And so you've got the power struggle between the government army and the paramilitary, effectively RSF, which was predicted, but it took a lot longer for that to happen. And so we just had, a kind of a loose plan of, right, okay, from this point on, you go to this border, from this point, it would be this, and just keeping that loose plan there. And then when it came to the protests, Dave had a really good intel as to where they were. So I'd always check in with him before venturing far out from where I was staying. And then he's like, say, look, avoid this bit, avoid that errand, and you'll be fine. So
I know you're paying for this service, but God, bloody love Dave.
The amount of times I said, I love Dave. He's the best. He's the absolute best.
Can we know Dave's background?
He's got a military background.
Okay. Military, inverted commas. We'll just leave it there. I'm sure there's some alphabet soup happening in that.
And we have met. Like, we've met up. Yeah.
Did he, when you met up, did he come along with a pixelated face so you could? Was he wearing glasses and a mask or some description?
No, he was.
You find out 20 years later when you meet him again, he was wearing a full disguise when you met him.
One of those Jason Bourne type rips or Mission Impossible rips the face off.
Hi,
he
Dave,
was
if you're listening.
I said it so many times. It's like, we love Dave. We love Dave. And he absolutely went above and beyond in supporting me on this trip and keeping me safe. And I will be, as my mother will be, eternally grateful.
Was there ever a point before you left and went, maybe I'll just take a male mate with me, just A, for company, but also from a security point of view?
To take a friend?
Yeah.
Look, I did look for people to join me because initially I was thinking like, oh, do I, don't? I was like, oh, maybe for some sections, and couldn't find anyone stupid enough to do it.
Well, this comes into the whole mindset thing, right? Because I am interested in what makes you tick compared to other people, and the fact that you couldn't find someone to go with you is probably evidence of this. But most people would have read the book or heard about the other kayaker that got taken by a crocodile and went, yeah, I'm not going to push my luck. I'm going in crocodile-infested areas. Plus, I've got hippos to deal with. Then most people, I suppose, obviously, Dave was an influence to that in regards to, oh, well, I had the hippo attack, and then I had the arrest. At some point, I would say I'm in over my head, and I know Dave was sort of your little guardian angel in some respects. I know you're fine, push on. But most people, before they've even got to that point, would say, no, this is too risky. And I understand you've done the risk assessment, and I get that. But you've gone, okay, here's the risk assessment. Here's all the things that could go wrong. Now I've done this training in terms of personal protection or what I can't remember what you called it. That told you everything that you could go wrong. You walked out of that and went, okay, well, that's terrifying. Like, there are so many points that I'll say a normal person, but like a regular person would say, this is a risk that I'm not willing to take on.
Cool.
And you've just gone, stuff it. Like, I still want to do this. Like, where does that full self-belief come from? Because I don't have that, but then I also grew up with parents probably going, oh, don't do that, it's a bit risky, or don't do that, out of love, like complete love of wanting to protect me. So where does that complete, stuff it, I just want to go and do it and live my life sort of come about?
Oh, I think it's so hard to sort of go, it's this one thing. I know when I came up with the idea, it was a visceral response. I had a great job and career, and I describe it as having a beautiful piece of clothing that just didn't quite fit me and suit me, and I just wasn't ready to settle. And it would have been, settling for a very beautiful existence. But I just felt I hadn't found it. And when I came up with the idea of doing this, it was just, oh my goodness, this is it. And a massive adventure in Africa. Oh my goodness, I want to do this. I'd been to Africa on holiday. It was my favorite destination to go to. I'd read the books of adventurers and explorers. It just had never occurred to me that I could do something like that. It hadn't crossed my mind until I saw a couple of what I'd call, the air quotes ordinary people doing expeditions, that it was enough of the sort of not just spark the imagination, but enough belief that's like, oh, I could do that. And it's like, oh, well, if they can do it, well, I could do it. I'm a risk manager and I'm a project manager, and I still can't fully explain in words what it was that was just made that strong desire for it just so incredibly strong. But it ticks so many boxes for me, and the belief that, with the right people around me and the right approach of trying to manage the risk and having response plans and doing all of the things, that I just wanted to give it a crack. But there was, saying that, I was drowning in self-doubt going into it. I just remember questioning and just feeling, I got there and I had all this shiny new gear, and I just felt like Bridget Jones does adventuring. I'm like, I've got all the gear and no idea. And questioning myself, and am I going to be able to, suddenly you've got 3 guys relying on me and my GPS to find the right route. It was incredibly stressful. But then I also remember the first day when we came down to the river where we were going to put in, and seeing the river, it's like all of that stress kind of evaporated. And then and it was just excitement. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm actually making this a reality. This thing that I've been working on for 2 years, it's 2.5 years since I came up with the idea. It's really happening, and I love creating something from nothing. And then I think there's a stubbornness that sort of keeps me going, and pride and ego, and this is why I needed the checks and balances from someone like Dave to make sure that the pride and the ego wasn't going to get me into trouble. And I think that's sometimes what you do see with adventurers. It can happen. And that's what I wanted to solve for and make sure didn't happen.
That you had a person removed from it that was the voice of reason.
Yeah, who would. So for example, when we got to getting closer to South Sudan, and the intel we got was that the local authorities there, the National Intelligence Security Service, were quite suspicious about me and what I was doing. I think maybe they thought I was a spy or a journal or something like that, which I get. The country that's been in civil war for more than 2 decades, the idea of doing something for, fulfillment, or because I just want to get more out of life. It's like, what? This is a country that's trying to just survive. And the intel we got was that they were going to most likely detain me. And that could have been for an hour and just ask a few questions and then I'd be on my way. Or it could have been a week, a month longer. And the FCO had said to me, it's like when I'd spoken to them post Burundi, they said, "Sarah, if anything happens in South Sudan, we cannot help you. And we advise you not to go." And before I'd left Australia, DFAT, like they've been really helpful. I'd seen embassies in Egypt and speaking to them, keeping them all up to date. And then a month before I left, I got a formal letter from DFAT saying, "Please reconsider your plans." And it's a very compliant kind of, try to be the good girl. It just felt so wrong to go against all this advice. Anyway, when it came to South Sudan, I just had to consider it and go, look, it's too big a risk, and talked it over with Dave. And it's like, it's the impact it has on other people. Yes, it still has an impact on embassy people. It has an impact on my family. It has an impact on the next adventure that comes through. And so I had to kind of park the ego and the pride and go, okay, I'm going to have to skip South Sudan. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to do all of it because of the amount of conflict further north in the country, and was just like, okay, I'm gonna have to come back and do that another day, hopefully. We'll see.
So you basically got out of the river, flew to the next stage,
so finished in like the north of Uganda, back to where I'd been basing myself out of Uganda and Ginger, which is where I'd gone to at the start, got the team, hired all the gear, then we'd driven to Rwanda, walked into the source, got underway. So then came back to Ginger and had Christmas there. And then in the new year, flew up to Khartoum. And then once I got everything sort of organized there and people to come with me, then we drove down to the south of Sudan, close to the border with South Sudan, put in there. The first section was kayaking for a week up to back to Khartoum. And then it was a month from after a couple of weeks, again, sort of replanning up to the north of Sudan.
Wow.
Which was beautiful. Oh my goodness, that was stunning.
Yeah. What did you learn about yourself on that trip? Because it's a very remote situation that you're in. It's a very vulnerable situation that you're in. There's a lot of reliance on other people to help you through that process and that dream of yours. What did you learn about yourself?
I think one of the greatest things for me was realizing, one, that everything's figure outable and the ability to problem solve and to, okay, whatever happens, I'm going to be able to deal with it. And that just brings so much confidence. And I heard, the hardest skier, the guy who ran the length of Africa. Did you see him, the British guy?
I saw there was a documentary on a guy that did it. I don't know if he walked or ran, but I did see some British dude doing it.
Ginger guy would be amazing, like running the length of Africa. And there was a situation up in the Sahara, so a long way through it, and the support car, they'd broken down 250 k's away from anything in the desert, no one around. But he said we didn't panic. Like, we just didn't really bat an eyelid because we knew we'd work out a way out of it somehow. And I think that's the biggest thing, because when we trust in our ability to deal with whatever comes up, we're more likely to go and do something bigger and better. And I think so much of that sort of self-doubt and where we stay in comfort zones and all of that stuff is, questioning our ability to deal with the things that, we don't know exactly what's coming.
Do you think it's because these days in our modern lives, we don't push ourselves much to test our boundaries?
Yeah, I think absolutely.
We're more comfortable sitting on a couch and watching a documentary on someone else doing it or whatever than going out and doing it ourselves.
Totally. And, there's so much, I think, messaging around not taking risk. And, here it can be a bit nanny state, like sometimes of like, oh, we're forcing you to put, it's being polite, you got to put locks on your windows because in case you fall out. And it's like, really, we're not taking any accountability that I can decide if I can open my window and like, are you serious? Oh my goodness. So, there's a part of, I had this conversation the other day with my husband because we're watching a YouTube channel and this guy was doing basically what you would see them, like, I don't know if you've ever been to Vietnam or Thailand and stuff. And, they're on bamboo ladders and stuff. And what we would consider in Australia, they would never be able to do, right? And this guy was in America and he was doing some cowboy building and he was on his own property.
And we were talking about the fact in Australia you'd never be able to do it. And I did say to him, there's an element of, weeding out the herd. If you just let people, do some crazy stuff, then, survival of the fittest comes
But the
in.
old Darwin Awards things, it's like we're weeding out from the gene pool of the people at the...
I was like, so maybe there's a little bit to be said about over-regulating the country.
Absolutely, that's hilarious.
We could start by not putting locks on windows,
Let's go crazy and make ourselves accountable for that, shall we?
Yeah.
No, I think it's, there's that part of us that's programmed to keep ourselves safe and go for comfort. But, we've sort of still got the programming that hasn't been upgraded since we were living in, on the plains and in the caves. And we're not dealing with the kind of threats that we're used to. And I think we need to be putting ourselves out there and trying, whether it is trying different things and challenging ourselves. It's like, I love, yes, there are things I absolutely back down from. And I'll admit that, but then there are other things I will go and push the boundaries, and I love playing at the kind of edges of things, because you learn about yourself and what you're capable of and what you can do. And I think, your comfort zone starts expanding, and things that would have, previously seemed outside of it fall inside of it. And you're more likely to take on bigger challenges and it's about taking calculated chances. I'm not talking about being completely reckless, and learning what we can do and how we can actually deal with things that come up. I think then we're more likely to go and do something new or try something and challenge ourselves.
And I still want to finish off this trip down the Nile, but what things would you shy away from now? I mean, you said you enjoy playing at the edges, and there are some challenges that you would definitely back away from. What would be out of your comfort? I don't want to say comfort zone, because I think obviously we've talked about pushing outside of your comfort zone, but what would be your hard limit?
But there are things I get, I go out on my surf ski and I don't like going out in big surf. And I probably used to go out in big surf. I still wouldn't call it, like when I see what some of the guys go out in. And I used to really beat myself up. I was like, oh, I'm not brave because I don't go out in big surf. And then I was chatting to someone who goes out in like crazy surf. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then he says to me, he's like, oh yeah, I just go on holiday to Hawaii. I would never go even on holiday, on a package holiday to Africa. It's too scary. And suddenly it was like, I just was able to be a little bit kinder to myself. It's like, okay, it's okay to have some things where you just go, I'm not going there. It doesn't mean that you are not, don't have courage and bravery. It's like we've all got our things that we sort of go, yeah, I'm happy to do that, because we get some kind of enjoyment. It's fulfilling some kind of, what we're getting out of it fills a need or something that we enjoy doing. And there are other things where I've had bad experiences in surf, and I know the reasons behind it, and that's where I will kind of back down. And I'm also going to be smart and take advice for the countries that I go through, and if people that I respect would come back and say, look, that's not safe, it's like, okay, I'm not going to do that.
So let's go back to the finishing off the Nile, because you've done a few other trips that I also want to touch on as well. So at what point, so you've hopped back in, you skipped the Sudan, so you've hopped back into the water, now you're going down or up the Nile. I don't know how you would describe it, considering it's the other way. What's the next step on that trip?
So I did Sudan and then into Egypt, and then I had a local paddler, Nadim, who joined me for the stretch through Egypt. And he was amazing at dealing with the police. The police, when they kind of got, so it's mainly the water police, you've got different kind of strands, and they were just very paranoid about anything happening to me. They rely on tourism so heavily, and they've, experienced in the past where things have happened to tourists, and then the tourism has taken a big dive. And then they were really good, so they could have turned around and said no, and there's nothing I could have done about it. But Nadim was amazing at kind of getting them on side and going, okay, we want to do this. And so it would end up, we couldn't camp. After a few days, they kind of stopped us being able to camp and would tell us where we could stay. And then, I'd either be in a police car being taken to the hotel, or if I was getting a taxi, then we would have police outriders. It's like I felt kind of like traveling royalty. It's like, who is coming to get me and what kind of army have they got? It was, I felt very safe. I think for Nadim, it was very frustrating because he wasn't free to go where he wanted in his country. So it was quite frustrating for him. And I said, but from my perspective, I feel incredibly safe. On the water, we had like a little rib next to us most of the time, or some kind of vessel next to us. Yeah. I literally had armed. There was one night we wanted to sail this sandy island, and we'd had a police escort on the water with us. And we'd set up camp because the police with us had said, yeah, fine. And then they call it in and head office sort of goes, nah, you got to move on. And so then there was this standoff of just arguing backwards and forwards. Eventually the head office said, okay, fine, but we're sending armed security. So then two guys rock up. Like, one of them had a shotgun and the other one had some other kind of gun. So then there's four guys and Nadim and me. There's four guys protecting me on this tiny, sandy little island in the middle of nowhere in Egypt. It was crazy. Felt very safe. And these poor policemen who'd been on the boat for the day, like there was no intention for them of like, overnighting somewhere.
Overnight, yeah.
So they didn't really have good. So then I was just like giving them some food and trying to get them on side, and yes, breaking bread with people. It certainly did help. So we were all sitting around a little campfire and sharing some tea and biscuits and bits and pieces. It was so random.
Where does the Nile end? Is it in
the Mediterranean? Yeah,
Mediterranean.
In Egypt.
So that was your police escort was through the last bit of the Nile.
Yeah, so Nadim didn't join me for the last stretch. So from Cairo to the end was about 250 Ks, and I set off without any Arabic, so that was always going to be quite challenging. And I was on my own to begin with, and it was like, oh, this is really exciting. And
were you kayaking at this point? Not rafting?
Yeah, this is all kayaking. Yeah. So through Sudan and Egypt, it's all kayaking, which was very exciting to be back, so doing what I know and I'm comfortable with, without hippos and crocodiles. Made it really exciting.
So crocodiles in Egypt? I thought there was.
Oh, there are some, but they're not quite so big and scary up there. I didn't see any.
Okay.
I think once you get off, yeah. I think once you get out of once you're below the Aswan Dam, I don't know, there could be, but I certainly didn't hear of them or see them. But yeah, and then I did have a boat with me on this last stretch for a bit of it. And then I thought I was on my own, and I got a call from someone, and it was in Arizona. I don't know. And so then ended up getting Nadim to speak to them. And he's like, no, Sarah, they're with you. Just look on the bank. There's a car there. They've just told me though they've been following you for ages. So they were following me. He said, just pull over here and they're going to take you to somewhere for the night. I was like, oh, okay, great, thanks. So then the next day I just had 12 Ks to do, and I don't think they did actually follow. So I had that last 12 Ks to do on my own. But when I got to that last day, I woke up that morning and had a real wobble of it, just the exhaustion. And you know what it's like when you're close to the end point of something, and it's you can almost grab it, but not quite. And it feels, rather than being 12 Ks, it felt more like 1,200 Ks that I was going to have to do. And I had a real wobble and just said, Sarah, sort yourself out. Come on, get it together. And once I got down and I saw the river, and it was all fine. And I got as close as I could. Huge surf on the Med, so I really wanted to be able to paddle out onto the Med, because I got to a point and caught it. Was like, okay, all right, this is done. And literally as soon as I'd stopped, Dave calls up. I was like, congratulations, you've done it. And there were tears.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Before you set off on this trip, were you careful about who you actually told that you were going to do it from a negative feedback point of view?
No. Because I wanted to get sponsorship, and I was raising money for Care International, or Care Australia, part of Care International, I had to go quite loud. There was a big part of it would have quite happily not. The other thing is I wanted community accountability, because I knew I'd potentially back down. But if I told everyone I was doing it, then I wouldn't.
But were you at a point of sort of no return when you said, yeah, I'm going to do this? So my point is, there's a lot of naysayers, and often they do it in terms of what they feel is in your best interest for you, right? They're not living your life, but they'll tell you how you should. And it's based on their own fears, right? So did you get to a point where you were at, Okay, you've done the risk management, you've done your self-defense training, you'd got Dave on board, everything, before you said, hey, Joe Blow, I'm heading off, and Mum, I'm heading off, and whatnot?
No, I did it way before that. I had no idea if I was even going to be able to put it off, and I announced it.
Right.
So gosh, when did I announce it? It would have been at least 18 months, a year to 18 months beforehand, announce what my plans were. But yeah, at that point I still didn't know. And I was really, because I'd been warned, like Pete Meredith, who I'd spoken to, give me all that initial advice. He said, just, be ready for the people who say you can't do it and it can't be done and this, that, the other. And no one did. And I was waiting for it. And like, do people really not get what I'm doing?
No, but you know what I think that means? I think that means you've got the right people around you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people, I hope it's that people trusted that I would be able to do it and I wasn't going to go and do something dumb. And if I like to think that, yeah, some people did say afterwards they did think about doing an intervention and going, Sarah, no. And I'm like, I'm so glad you didn't, because I would have got so angry. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, maybe. Sarah's going to do this just out of pure stubbornness.
Yeah.
So the whole trip of the Nile was 10,000 kilometres rafting.
No, 1,100 rafting, and 3,000 of kayaking.
3,000 kayaking. Okay.
Yeah, a few other bits and pieces of yeah, thanks. That
you
would
went
be
far.
A couple of laps of the planet.
I wasn't thinking literally, all right? I just wrote down an extra zero.
Right.
Lordy. And then you didn't stop there. So you've done the Murray River, which is actually something that I would love to do one day. Source to mouth. 21 days that takes.
No, I did it it was it 60? 60 days it took me.
60 days, okay.
Yeah, so it's 2,500 K. So went in with some people who sort of showed me into the source of the Nile, because I'm not.
Oh no, I'm talking about Murray. So 60 days.
60 days on the Murray River. So it took me into the source of the Murray. They took me in there because I'm not an experienced bushwalker, and I'd probably still be walking around Kosciuszko National Park if I was trying to find it, because there was, I don't know how, the chap that showed me in that, I don't know how he knew where it was, because there's this metal pole, which is where it is. And it was, unfortunately the fires did go through there afterwards, so I don't know if it's still there, but there was a little plastic box, and everyone who got to the source of the Nile, there's a little notebook and pencil in there, and so you put your name in there.
Source of the Murray River.
Source of the Murray River. Sorry, I will think you get it right.
That's all right. I put an extra few thousand on your journey before. That's all right. We're at the Murray River, Kosciuszko.
Look at Murray River, Australia. Murray River, Australia. Yeah. Yeah, and so then we walked along. There were four of us, and tried to stay we caught it within a stone's throw of the Murray. And then because it was
for people that don't know, and for those that are listening outside of Australia, the Murray River is a very long river in Australia, and at the source, it's like pretty much a seep, like it's not a river at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then it gets, so it's a very tiny little stream, and then it's gradually widening up. This was in the end of 2019, so it was the end of the last big drought. And it meant that there was a stretch of about 70 Ks, which would have been white water, but because it was too treacherous to do, because there wasn't enough water going through it, so I had to walked basically to Kankoba, which is where I then put in on the raft. So sort of had to miss a small section.
Were you rafting or kayaking?
This was kayaking, and yeah, there was a lot of
dragging your kayak along the
There were
river
sections where I was, I get in it, paddle 100 meters, get out. It would be not pure rocks, but I'd be having to get out and drag the kayak, then get back in it, and then you'd get round where there would be some faster moving water, and there were strainers. It was really tricky, and I wanted to stop. I really was hating it.
That when I was in, oh goodness, it was probably primary school, I remember going on a canoeing school camp, right? It was on the Snowy River, and the river was really low, and I still remember having to pull for, probably half an hour or something, my canoe on the bottom before we could hop in again. And that was back then. And I'm not talking days and kilometres or 70 kilometres that you're talking about. How did you maintain your mental sanity doing that? Because it's a pain in the butt.
Oh, I wanted to back down. I mean, luckily, it wasn't long stretches I was having to, it wasn't like a kilometre having to drag the kayak. It was nothing like that. But it was just a constant stop. And then looking, it's like, I'm not covering any K. It's like, I'm going to take forever to do this. And it was summertime, so it was, obviously hot. So it's probably not the best time. And then it's at the time of year when all the snakes had just come out of hibernation. So they're hangry and horny, which is like not the kind of state you want to meet Australian snakes. And so I met quite a few tiger snakes and goodness knows what else going through Kosciuszko. Had my worst Christmas day ever. So I'd been dragging the kayak all day. I had no mobile reception. So I couldn't, I could message on the sat phone or the GPS, but I couldn't have a conversation with anyone. It was stinking hot. Anyway, had a nice camp spot and I'm sitting there. I've just had something to eat and a brown snake comes around the corner of my tent. I have never moved so fast in my life. So the snake moves pretty bloody quickly as well, I can tell you. Thankfully in the opposite direction.
Can I say though, when you think that you've got a snake, so for those that aren't in Australia, you get taught that you're meant to freeze. Right? Because a lot of the Australian snakes are attracted to movement. So you go, I'm going to freeze, and you get taught that's what you're meant to do, freeze. When that flight or flight kicks in, you've got no control. And I was a flighter the first time I saw a snake. I was out of there. It was like one of those cartoons. There was dust. Dust in my wake, I can tell you. And I'm not a runner. I think I broke every land speed record. So I can completely understand that you saw this brown snake in the middle of nowhere and you got out of there.
Because I just was not expecting when it comes round the thing. The other ones that we'd seen in Kosciuszko, one, I had people with me who I trusted who would sort of, and we'd walk past them carefully and it was fine. But this was very friggin' close. So I'm then freaking out, right? Well, I don't know if it's gone under my tent. I didn't see where it went because I was going in the opposite direction. Luckily, some guys come down. I think they're gone fishing or something. And I do the whole damsel in distress. I'm like, there was a snake. Hail, hail. So they come over.
Look,
and I'm like,
I'm all for damsel in distress when it suits. And I think that is an absolutely valid time to be a damsel in distress.
Bless them, they came over and they were a little bit cautious. And so I got my paddle and lifted my tent up. I was like, no, it's gone. And then they point out, it's like, oh, the thing is where you are. So we had a dust track down to the river between some trees and then there was a slope coming down to where the tent was. He said, it's a bit of a thoroughfare. They come down at night to go and get some water from the river and come back. And then, of course, my tent is a bit like a safety thing for them to go around rather than being in open space. They were going to come next to my tent. So it's like, oh, brilliant. So then I go into my tent and like seal it up and sweat like a bastard because it's the middle of summer and it's hot. And I'm like, this is the worst Christmas day ever.
Why did you move the tent?
I think they would still have potentially come down. I just didn't want, not happy. Really not happy. I'm really questioning it. The vlog I did that day is quite entertaining. Back at it and I do laugh. And I was so miserable. Anyway, so I'd said to myself, so you cannot back down until you get to the Hume Dam and see what it's like the other side and see if they're letting any water through. And luckily, once I got to the Hume, they were letting a bit of water. And so then it's like, okay, I'll keep going. And then I was able to do, 50, 60, 70 Ks a day and feel like I was making progress. It was just that not making progress it did my head in.
And for those of you that aren't familiar, which is probably most of you, with the Hume, it's about 6 times the size of Sydney Harbour. So it's an enormous stretch of water to have to canoe or kayak over.
It was so low, the water level. So it was really spooky because you've still got
all the dead
what's
trees
left of the dead trees. Yeah, and they're all sticking out. And because it's so low, you can see all of them. And it was really spooky. And at one point I got out, I think I needed to pee or something, and I put my foot down and it was
mud.
And I'm like, oh, I can't get out. And then I'm thinking, if this is what it's like all the way around, I can't get out and camp tonight.
No.
And luckily I was able to find a place where it was solid. I was so relieved when I found some solid ground and I could get out and camp.
So I spent some time up that way, and yeah, you can't, like, people can't, when it's that low, because it's so muddy down there. So it drops below any boat ramp levels or anything like that. So literally you don't have a way out. So you can't let your dogs run because they get stuck in the mud. You can't, like, anything. And it's a huge boating and water skiing area and stuff like that for people that don't know. So yeah, it's a challenge.
It was
that low.
far. And then, of course, like you said, there's all the boaters. So then once I get below the Hume in particular, and you've got, it's back to river, and I had no idea how popular speedboating and jet skis were inland.
Yeah.
And there's just water
So you're dealing
skis
with the
and
wakes.
boats, wakes and everything. And then you've got the ones doing the racing and just like, no.
So your surf ski skills really came into their own on a body of lake water out there, middle of nowhere.
And river. There was one stretch I came up to where it was going across another sort of reservoir dam areas, and it was a narrow section almost like connecting two lakes, and you just had all these boats going backwards and forwards, and the weight from them, because it was no room for it to dissipate. And I'm like, I can't get safely through this. So then I'm going back and I'm trying to find somewhere to camp, but it's all houses along waterfront houses. So I stopped at one of them and I was like asking, is there anywhere I can go? And they suggested somewhere. So I came back. It's like, no, I couldn't camp there. And of course, you've got on the Victorian side, it's that Crown land rule. So 50 meters back from the river is Crown land, which means that you can camp anywhere. So they said, look, the bloke next door's not around. Just camp, it's Crown land, camp on his front lawn. So that's what I did. And then left really early the next morning before everyone got up and started revving.
How do you deal with the isolation and the feeling of vulnerability? Because let's face it, if you got bitten by the snake and those guys went around, your life expectancy is not great.
Well, I had a sat phone and bandages, so I would have done the first aid and
but they got to get to you though.
Yeah,
they got to
and
get
not
to
move
you in time, and not. Yeah, you can't
move.
move.
Mobilise, no.
Yeah, that's the most scariest thing to me.
Yeah.
That if there's an emergency, how they're going to get to you in time.
Yeah. But the isolation, I mean, I'm an only child, so that I think helps. I'm good with my own company, although even that can get a little bit tiresome after a while. But I met people along the way. Like, yes, there'd be some remote bits. Down the Nile, I was very rarely on my own, which I looked as a risk going into it, as that could be difficult for me to handle, being around people all the time. The Murray was the opposite. I had a lot more time on my own, but still, there's still people to talk to, and I go and, I was doing refueling and go and stay in a pub or something like that and chat to the people in the pub. Obviously everyone's really friendly, or if I'm staying at some free camping sites, there'd be people around. I met some lovely people. There's people I'm still in touch with from that trip.
Yeah. So you make the most of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the Murray River was 2,500 kilometres. You cycled across Australia in 2021 just because, you obviously can. It's ridiculous.
Something to do during COVID. We got into Western Australia without having to quarantine. It was like this tiny window. We were able to actually get in there and not quarantine. We practically ran out of the airport quick before Mark changes his mind.
Well, can I and the listeners know this, I was in Melbourne, so yeah. But any time we talk about the vid on here, even if we're not saying anything negative about anything, it always comes up with a warning on the. We'll leave that there.
So Emma starts twitching. Well, we just knew if we could get into WA, everything else is going to be fine.
Yeah. So where did you start? When you cycled, where did you start? Because you went across the country.
We went across. So we went, flew into Perth, got up to, basically we got started at Steep Point, which was a bit of a challenge just getting out to Steep Point, which is the most westerly point, mainland westerly point of Australia.
So you started in WA?
Yes.
Right.
So started at that most westerly point, and that was quite an interesting little track to go down. I mean, I knew what it was going to be like. I'd spoken to the local rangers, but it was definitely worse than we thought. We knew that there was a few kilometres of sand dunes to get over, which when you've got bikes, you know, with gear weighing 50, 60 kilos is quite interesting. But there was a lot, you know, those sandy corrugations?
Yeah.
And it was like that. Yeah, which is when you're on a bike, you think it's like, oh, it's high ground, high ground. Oh, look, it's sand. And the bike going right. Oh. So, and it was...
And the film for people that are on the audio only, it was a wheel turn, basically a wheel turning, and you're in the dust. Yeah.
Yes,
into the
exactly.
Wheel, yeah.
And, you know, we did this, it was March to May. So, you know, coming into autumn, and hadn't expected it to be, you know, as we're getting like unseasonal weather conditions. So it was sort of 40 degrees, and we had days in WA where it's like 44 degrees was the hottest we had. I don't know how we did it. Look back on it now, and it's like I go out for a cycle ride, but it's 30, and I'm like, look, I can't go. But I think we just warmed up to it, as it were, quite quickly.
And how long did it take you?
That was 62 days and 4,700 k's.
How do you deal with the boredom of it?
There almost wasn't, because particularly when we had to be on our game so much on the roads because of the road trains. And you've generally got single carriageway, you know, single lane each way. There's no median and not much of a hard shoulder. So you've really got to be on all the time. So and then we were dealing with so many flat tires. I think we were punished for our lack of bike. Our biggest weakness going into it was our lack of bike mechanic skills, and it just felt like we got punished for that. So we're really good at changing tires now, like really good. We changed so many. We ran out of, by the time we got to the bitumen from Steep Point, we ran out of inner tires. It was ridiculous. There was one point some people go past were helping us, and it ended up there were like four-wheel drives filled with families had stopped to help us. There was like 6 blokes, and everyone was trying to work out why we were getting these flat. They couldn't work it out, which made us feel marginally better about the fact that we were dealing with all these flat tires. But it's quite entertaining. This sort of video.
Were you doing this with another female friend?
With a female friend, yeah.
So the damsel in distress again came in to help. I love it.
And these people love it. I mean, they were stopping and offering, do you want any cold drinks? Yes. Yes, we would.
But that's a very Aussie thing to do too, you know, to stop and make sure that everyone's okay. Yeah.
And it happened all the time. Like we had this couple, retired couple, they were caravanning, and he was an ex pro cyclist. So when he saw us and carried on to pull over where he knew that there used to be water, and he was worried that we might be expecting water there. And so, you know, stopped, and we had a chat, and they gave us water. And they said, oh, look, tomorrow we're going to be here. Why don't you come down and join us for breakfast? So they gave us, we got there, we had breakfast with them, which was really lovely. Rob and Kerry, they were awesome. Then they said, look, we live in Kalgoorlie. Come and stay with us when you get there. And so we did. They put us up in their home. They paid for us to have a float tank session. They paid for us to go and organise a helicopter ride over Super Pit, like the massive pit in Kalgoorlie. Yeah. They were extraordinary. And then when we had real issues going across the Nullarbor again, we were still having problems with tyres and inners. And they unasked, they drove and brought us tyres. 1,200 kilometre round trip to bring us tyres. It's like that level of kindness and generosity, and thoughtfulness was just, it blew us away. And it's one of the greatest things about doing these trips is exposing, because you expose yourself where you kind of rely on the kindness of strangers, or you at least open yourself up to it, and you get to experience it, which you just don't in daily life, where it's like, you know, go to work and doing your normal routine. You in my experience rarely get to experience it in the same way, to the same level as I have done on these trips. It's really beautiful.
So I live in Hobart now, and we were up Mount Wellington probably 6 months ago when it was warm, and there was a guy going around asking for a lift down the mountain. He had walked up the mountain, and we ended up giving him a ride back down. And he was talking about how he had hitchhiked essentially around the majority of the world. And he'd been doing this for the last 5 years. And he said, I've never not got a lift, and I've never not got anywhere on time. And so he was literally putting it out there to the universe. He had someone to meet at 4:30, and we picked him up at 4:00. Everyone else was saying no. And when he got in the car, he's like, "Oh, I've got to meet these people at 4:30," and we dropped him off at like 28 past. Right. And he's like, this is my luck. This is the world that I live in. Because I said to him, it's like, were you concerned? I would be getting concerned. He goes, no, because it always works out for me. And you also have that sort of openness to the universe in terms of, everything's going to work out.
Yeah. It's the trust in the universe and the trust in people and trust in yourself.
Yeah.
That you'll make it work out.
And before people start carrying on, I assessed my gut feeling, and I had my husband with me, so I wouldn't be doing it by myself. And I got a good vibe off the guy. And it was the first hitchhiker I've ever picked up, okay? So you don't have to send me in mail saying I'm an idiot. I did my own risk assessment.
But you do. I tell you what, the energy thing is, so you really do pick up on that. And I think I relied on that a lot, I would say, of that, the energy of people, and you get a vibe.
You then have done a solo trip across Oman. Talk to me about that, because that, to me, would not be somewhere that I'd want to go as a solo female. And I know we've talked about solo female stuff a lot in this episode, but it is a reality of traveling alone as a woman. What was your take on it? Because you said that it was amazing.
I did, and I did a lot of research beforehand. There was actually, because what I wanted to do was a paddling trip up that way, and it was just going to get too hard to work out, and I didn't have the funds. And someone said, oh, you should go to Oman. And I was looking at doing paddling there, and I was like, oh, it's still going to be too hard. And I was like, oh, why don't I go and cycle there? I've got all the gear. I just got to pack it up and take it with me. And did the research into, how safe is it there? You Google solo woman traveler Oman, and it was just all so positive what came back. You look at the ratings, like Smart Traveler, green rating. And I spoke to Dave as well and got his.
I was going to ask if Dave was on there.
Yeah, of course. So I asked Dave, and he was there in the background all the way, just keeping an eye out on things for me. Bless him. And yeah, so I did my research, and then it's like, okay, I think this is fine. And then the same as I did on the Murray, and I did in Oman, because I was traveling on my own on both of those, is I had my girlfriends who I was checking in with every day. And we had protocols if, what times it would be, protocols if I didn't check in. They also I had to get a response back from them, so that I knew that they'd got my message. And, if one of them hadn't, then I'd go to the other one. So I always had those protocols in place, and then agreements were like, this is who you'll call if I don't respond, and, this is what we do. And, we've got Dave to help out in an emergency as well. So I wasn't checking in with Dave, it was with friends. But, there's steps you take. Right? You still got to be careful and smart about these things. But it was a fantastic, and I met other solo female travelers there who all had a great time. And I'd always wanted to go and travel in the Middle East and never had. And other than practically getting flashbacks when I sort of got on the bike and started, bike packing again after all the dramas I'd had cycling across Australia. It's almost like this twitching tires and, running out of, worrying about running out of water and food and blah, blah. And then it was just, and I'd had a lot of, my bike kept throwing the chain off and had all sorts of problems. And so it's almost like all of that just came back. And it's like, did you
do a, if you identified in Australia that your bicycle maintenance stuff wasn't up to scratch, did you do like upskill in that before you went over?
That might have been a smart thing to do, but no, I did. One thing I did look, but part of the reason was There are so many bike shops there.
Oh, God. Yes, but you didn't know that before
I
you went
did.
over.
Oh,
you
no,
did?
I did. So I
Okay.
did a bunch of research because I'm like, okay, if I take my bike to pieces, I want someone to put it back together, after traveling. I don't trust myself to put this thing back together and cycle it. So I looked at the shops, found a shop, and I went in there. It's like, could you put this back together and, check gears and this and that and the other, so that to make up for the fact that, yes, I wasn't going to be
You're a
able
numpty, so
to.
you didn't know, yeah.
You should have said when I had this bike bag, I bought a bike bag, and it was the video shows that it takes all of like 3 minutes to put your bike in there. Like 2 hours later, I'm like, for the 50th time, I'm replaying this video, how to pack your bike. It's like, oh my God, for a relatively smart person, I was like, what am I doing wrong here?
Again, an indication that perhaps skill-wise you shouldn't be going over if you can't even put it in a bag. But yet, you persevered and ended up having an amazing trip.
And I did.
What was the most surprising thing about Oman that you weren't expecting, apart from all the bike shops?
There were a lot of bike shops. Cheesecake. Really good cheesecake.
Hello, I think these are my people. I can't believe I snorted on cheesecake. That's how much I love it. Oh, shit. Oh, okay. So Oman for cheesecake.
Yeah. I ended up calling it the Cheesecake Tour of Oman.
Oh my God, what a great business idea.
Well, yes. That's what you're doing tours. Yeah, I discovered after a few days, I was like, this cheesecake, I'll have some of that. And then I noticed it's everywhere. Really good cheesecake. So I ate a lot. So good.
Is there a particular type of cheesecake that you love?
There was the one, it's a Portuguese, I think, style. And then they would serve it with Nutella, like running Nutella over it.
Oh.
Yeah. There was all sorts of cheesecake there. I worked out how to find the good coffee shops, and there was one, I think it was called Oz Coffee or something like that. I was like, oh, I've got to go there. And it was amazing coffee. So if you searched for specialty coffee, so I'd Google it when I was coming into the larger towns, and if there was a specialty coffee, it would be really good coffee and cheesecake. And so that's what I spent my time searching. Really embedding myself culturally.
And this would be my idea of an amazing trip, right? That you end up fatter after all of the cycling that you do across Oman, but you end up 10 kilos heavier because of all the cheesecake. That is my idea of an ideal trip.
Well, I actually managed to lose weight through it. I couldn't believe it, like the amount I was
eating.
eating.
You are cycling though, a lot.
But I wasn't doing like the crazy Ks. Like my original plan had been to sort of go all the way down the coast. And another thing I did is I started, I think it was like 250 Ks north of Muscat, the capital, knowing that it was very populated. And then I was not that far away from the shops. So it's like, okay, let's get going, get into the swing of things, check how the bike is. I've got then 3 days to get into the swing of things, deal with any problem. And I did have some slight problems. So then I went back to Muscat, stopped there for a night, got the issues fixed, and then carried on. And then I was like, oh, I'm not comfortable, in case there's problems with the bike. Some of it was going to be a little bit more remote. So then I changed my plan and adapted it. But it just worked really well, and got to see, cycle down the coast, and you got all sorts of amazing things like a sinkhole and these wadis, which are sort of like the canyons filled with water. And then cycled up to Niswa, which is really old and beautiful, and then down to the desert area where there's all these places you can go and stay in the desert, and stayed in this really lovely camp, and just experiencing 2 nights right out in the desert, getting up to watch the sunrise, and it just being silent, like no wind, no birds, nothing, just silence. And it's like, how often do we get to, and just seeing this vast desert stretching out around you. It was
it
spectacular.
The silence, was it a bit like, because you're not used to it, right?
Really not used to it. It was really weird. It's like, oh, there's just no noise. You can almost hear, your heart beating, kind of like your body. You can hear like that. It's like, oh, wow, this is It's really special. And just, yeah, watching the sun come up. And I don't know, I'm just fascinated by the desert. That's why I loved when I was doing the Nile. Paddling through the Sahara was just spectacular and quite surreal. You know, you're on a river going through the world's biggest hot desert and then getting to camp there. I really, really loved it.
Any thoughts of doing more desert stuff in Australia?
I haven't at the moment. I haven't got plans to do that at the moment. I think that, you know, the challenge with Australia, like where I was there in Oman, it wasn't super remote by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I'm staying in a camp. The distances here are just so vast. You know, where I was, because I was on the river and going through the Sahara, you're next to the water source, so you've got people. You know, there would be, you go for quite long stretches where, say, without, but there's normally, you know, something nearby. And I just feel like, yeah, it's pretty vast here.
It's one of the things that I had a concept of so after the big L in Melbourne, shall we say, so we don't get suppressed on the socials, we sold up and went around Australia in a van, and the listeners that I've actually posted about the trip and stuff, so the regular listeners will know this. But conceptually you go, oh, okay, it's 8 hours between towns or 8 hours between you see people. But then actually doing it is a very different thing.
Oh.
And my husband had thought, oh, we would have cell phone reception, and I had researched it, so I knew that we wouldn't. But there is a sense of shit, like if anything happens, we're stuffed. Like, and we had a camper van, so we had liters of water and a bed and, you know, all this sort of stuff, but we were dealing with the heat. So there is an element of vulnerability when you're out that level of isolation, 100%, which I get, and that would be ever so heightened in terms of if you're on a bike.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there are people who have gone across the middle, but no, it's not. There's other things way up. That's way down the list. There's a lot of other stuff.
What's next then?
No, I do want to go. I've got some ideas which I'm not putting out there just yet, but there is a big one I do want to do in a couple of years. But in the meantime, I'd love to go and paddle down the Persian Gulf. That's what I originally wanted to do when I did Oman. Obviously, things at the moment might.
I was going to say that may not be.
Dave
might have a little bit of a word about that onto you.
Yeah.
That might be one that he goes,
might pause that one and
Charlie,
do something. But yeah, there will be. Yeah, I need to get a few more things lined up before I announce the next one. But I want to take all of these lessons from these other expeditions, you know, the things that have worked and all the lessons I've learned and what hasn't, and do a real big one, while my body can still do all of this stuff. Cause...
I would have thought you've done several real big ones, so you don't consider them really big ones?
No, they were big ones. They were.
Are you thinking sort of from Canada through down South America?
So along those lines, those kind of lines, yeah.
Oh, cryptic. You've written a book. Well, you've written a couple of books now, haven't you?
No, written one, writing another.
Okay. So talk about those ones, because I do want to plug your books.
Oh, thank you. So Paddle the Nile, no surprises what that one's about. And there are stories.
Paddling the Nile?
Oh, he's good. Ben, he's good.
Title gave it away.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
So that's available on Amazon. And yeah, it's, you know, it goes into a little bit on the planning, but it's about also about the countries that I went through and a bit of history on some of them as well. So it's not just I got up, I paddled, I went to sleep, I avoided hippos. I got
up, I paddled, I got arrested today.
Yeah. So there's that one, and then I'm writing Gulp, How to Embrace Risk and Live Boldly, because that's what I love encouraging people to do.
Yes, that would be if you can articulate for the everyday person like me on how to push past those fears. Amazing.
Look, some of us, I mean, which is what this is, you know, about. It's about how can we plan? You know, you plan well and you prepare, you know, you're doing that risk management. What information do I need? What skills am I lacking? And then I think when it comes to the fear, I mean, this is why you've got to be doing it to practice it, because the only way, you can't get around fear, you have to go through it. But also getting really specific of what is the actual fear about. Because I think we can sort of go, oh, that feels a bit scary and uncomfortable, and I just back away from the whole thing. Whereas actually when we get specific and go, it's really just about this thing here, like it's just the snakes or it's just this. And then you start thinking about, well, how can I avoid that? Or how can I reduce the likelihood of something happening or reduce the consequence? And you can start, or how can I do some additional training? Where I was really scared of the rapids. So, okay, well, I need to do some work in the rapids. And I did swiftwater rescue technician, and I did courses to get better at holding my breath underwater in kind of stressful situations. Like, what can I do to give me enough confidence to face the fear? Competence creates confidence. And how, there's different things. You look at Ant Middleton's book of The Fear Bubble, and that's all about I can never say it. Compartmentalizing fear.
I can't say it either. I went to help you and I failed on that one.
It's a real tricky one.
Yeah.
Seeing it and just seeing it in a bubble and how you can do that. I did before coming into the trip, because I knew the Nile was going to be so much more mental than a physical challenge. And that I'm not great at dealing with, those very high stress situations, high pressure situations. And, came across a TED talk by a chap called Tom Chabey, who's ex Navy SEALs, and it was all about shifting our perspective, reframing something from a threat to a challenge, because we respond differently, physiologically, emotionally, cognitively, depending on how we see it. And our ability to stay in that challenge mode, is also partly driven by whether we feel we can deal with the situation. Susan Jeffers with her book Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. It's all about, if we feel that we might be able to deal with it, then it's easier to face the challenge. So whether it's, gradually doing things, but it's not about being fearless. That's also one thing I always say. It's not about having to be fearless. We don't want to be fearless. It's about finding a way to channel that fear and overcoming it, but certainly not letting it stop us from doing the things that we really want.
I think that's it just comes down to mindset, doesn't it? And it's so important. And some people like yourself have chosen to push your boundaries and embrace challenges. And there's other people like me that think about it.
Then go do it. So I'm doing things. So when I went to Oman, I mean, it's a bit bizarre, but being out of my comfort zone didn't feel as similar as it used to. And I was like, okay, that's, and you sort of interesting, that observation. I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, I want to do something about it. So I decided that when I got to my birthday, which was at the end of last month, I was like, I'm going to embark on a quest and to do, in the space of a year, 52 things that take me into the unknown, uncomfortable and uncertain, one or all three. So it started off with a sunrise to sunset walk in the Royal National Park here in Sydney, like routes I haven't been on before, and unplugged. So there's a bit of discomfort. There's a bit, we're not talking about super high risk stuff, but just trying different things. I did, yes, I'm a speaker, but I still get nervous before I speak. So I've counted one of those. I was at the boat show and decided, okay, I'm going to count that as one of them. Then last week I had a crack at jiu-jitsu for the first time.
Did you like it?
I did. I really did. But I just feel the risk of injury is so high, and I don't want, it's not my thing, and I don't want that something to take me away from my thing. So I would love to keep going with it, but it felt a bit risky. This week I'm getting up at 4:30 every morning and getting on or in the water. So yes, so I've just got a year of all sorts of different things. There's
Are you documenting this?
Yeah, I'm sharing it on socials. And
you should do it on YouTube. Myself. You should start a YouTube channel, do this.
I know. I'm so bad at doing socials. And then it's all the editing. Some of them I will definitely do and put up on YouTube. Yeah, so it's an entertaining year. I've got speed dating coming up. I'm going to a gig and I have to go there and dance on my own. But the kids.
It's interesting that you're talking about speed dating. So I'm assuming that you're single.
Yeah.
Do you find it hard to find men that can match your energy level or adventurousness?
Yeah, I mean, I just struggle with dating generally. Just about given up, really. I open up the apps and a little bit of me dies every time. Yeah, I just look at it. I've created, I'm so lucky, where I live and the life that I have, and I've created a life that I really enjoy. And it's that if someone I meet comes in and
compliments
we add to each other's, like, great, but who knows?
And I think that's something that people, they don't do enough of, is actually consciously creating the life that they want for themselves, instead of just being in a 9 to 5 or whatever. Well, okay, if that 9 to 5 is not doing it for you, then either find another 9 to 5 or change something in your life that's going to create the world that you want. We're only here for a limited amount of time.
Definitely. We just got to experiment. I think it's also, we can get so caught up and go, oh, okay, this isn't it. And I've got to find what it is. And it's like, just go and open new doors and, join a surf club. I'd go and do different things. I went and did the swim this morning down at Marnpool down in Maroubra. Met this really lovely person and we connected and had a really lovely chat. Now, if I'd stayed in bed, yes, that would have been lovely and comfortable and warm. But I would have missed out on that connection. And, with all the things I'm going to do, you never know where things are going to take you. So it's just experiment. And when we get more comfortable opening new doors and trying new things, then I think we're more likely to grab opportunities as opposed to hesitate. And we're not going to have those potential, set ourselves up for regret, and to your point of that, being more conscious about how we're existing and not sort of living unconsciously and kind of just getting stuck in the groove, which is, I know it's easy to do.
Well, isn't it takes effort. The quote that says most men live a life of quiet desperation.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that everyone goes out there and gets a divorce and suddenly, I'm not suggesting that, but talk about it as a family if that's your situation, about what you want to do and figure out how and then we don't need to have, it's like when I started the Nile trips, of course I didn't have all the answers as to how it was going to be done. But just trusting, it's like, just start taking a step. And you might go, oh, but it's not the right time now. And just start taking a step. Because where your energy goes, you just, it starts drawing things in, and just work towards the things if you can. And I realize, this is coming from a place of a lot of privilege, and more than I'm probably conscious of. But I still feel like we have a lot of ability to get in the driving seat and be a little bit more active and not sort of that dragged passively forwards. And I just love encouraging people to go and, like, if it's the slight whisper, go do it. Just start. You're doing coaching, aren't you?
Yeah, I do some coaching, and I'm about to start. Actually, it's going to be really fun. I'm so excited about this program. Are you ready to Gulp? So it's going to be a 6-week program, mostly group coaching, but some one-on-ones. And it's all about, initially doing the pre-work of coming up with some ideas, and I've got a structured way of kind of helping people come up with some ideas if they're looking for some more, and then going through, how can we plan, how can we prepare, how can we overcome some of the the fears and the self-doubts and deal with obstacles and keep our momentum going. So yes, I'm very excited about that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
When does it start?
Beginning of October.
Okay. So we're in August now.
Yeah.
I'll link your website, Sarah J. Davies, DAVIS.com.
Yes. Thank you.
On the show notes, and everyone can get in contact with Sarah and do the Gulp workshop.
Have the Gulp moments.
Amazing.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much.